And today, we're tackling maybe the ultimate mystery,
Yeah.
the human brain. I mean, this organ lets us write music, solve equations, even just experience the world. But how does physical stuff create, us? So our mission today is to wade through a whole lot of sources, a lot of discoveries, and give you a kind of shortcut to understanding this command center.
Hmm.
From the tiniest cells to the big functions, its history, its future, the works.
And it really is an extraordinary thing, isn't it? It's only, what, about 2% of our body weight?
Yeah, tiny.
But it uses up this huge chunk of our energy, a massive share of oxygen and glucose, and yet it's the hub. It literally enables everything you do, everything you think, you feel. It's foundational.
Okay, so let's start big picture. The brain's grand architecture. It's the central command of the nervous system, right, with the spinal cord making up the central nervous system.
Exactly.
It processes, integrates, coordinates, pretty much everything.
Precisely.
Mm.
And when you look at its main structure, its gross anatomy, you can basically see three main parts. First, there's the cerebrum. That's the biggest bit, makes up something like 85% of the brain's weight.
Wow.
And it's split into those two halves, the cerebral hemispheres. The wrinkly outer layer, that's the cerebral cortex.
Gray matter.
That's the gray matter, yeah. Dense with neuron cell bodies doing the heavy lifting, the processing.
Wow.
Underneath that, you've got the white matter. That's more like the wiring, the insulated pathways sending signals fast across the brain. And this cortex, it's incredibly complex, layers upon layers. We're still mapping it out. These hemispheres are divided into lobes. You've got the frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital. Those are the big four.
Okay.
And the frontal lobe, well, that's often called the brain's CEO. It's crucial for, self-control, planning, reasoning, higher level stuff. It's kind of mind-boggling how small changes there can just completely alter someone's personality, their ability to function day to day.
Yeah.
And then the occipital lobe, way at the back, that's almost all about vision, processing what you see.
Okay, so cerebrum first. Then you mentioned the little brain.
The cerebellum.
That's right, the cerebellum sits underneath the back of the cerebrum, connected to the brainstem. It's absolutely vital for coordinating fine movements, making them smooth and precise. Think playing piano or even just walking steadily.
Got it.
And the third main part is the brainstem. This connects the cerebrum down to the spinal cord. It's made of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. And interestingly, 10 of the 12 pairs of cranial nerves come right out of the brainstem.
Controlling things like eye movement, breathing.
Exactly, a whole host of vital functions.
So this incredibly important organ, it sounds pretty delicate. How is it kept safe?
It is delicate,
Yeah.
which is why it's got some serious protection. First, obviously, the hard skull.
Right.
Then it floats in cerebrospinal fluid, CSF. It's this clear liquid that cushions it, acts like a shock absorber.
Okay.
And crucially, there's the blood-brain barrier. Super selective about what gets in from the bloodstream.
Right. We'll probably come back to that. Definitely. And a fun fact, or maybe slightly unnerving the living brain, it has the consistency of, soft tofu.
Really? Tofu?
Yeah. Really underscores how fragile this powerhouse actually is.
Okay, we've seen the big structures, but the real action, the thoughts, the feelings, that's happening down at the microscopic level, right? Let's zoom way in. What are we looking at?
It's the scale that's just mind-blowing here. You've got over 86 billion neurons. These are the main processing cells.
86 billion.
Billion, with a B, and roughly the same number of glial cells, the support crew. Glia aren't just passive, though. Astrocytes feed neurons, manage the chemical environment. Oligodendrocytes provide that insulation, the myelin sheath, for faster signals. Microglia are the immune cells cleaning up debris.
So a whole ecosystem in there.
Absolutely. And some neurons are huge. Bet cells and motor cortex, for instance, are among the biggest in the body.
So 86 billion neurons.
Yeah.
How do they actually do anything? How does that turn into, me thinking this thought right now?
It's all about connections. Neurons talk to each other across tiny gaps called synapses. When an electrical impulse reaches the end of a neuron, it triggers the release of chemical messengers, neurotransmitters.
Like dopamine, serotonin.
Exactly. Dopamine, serotonin, GABA, glutamate, acetylcholine, loads of them. These chemicals cross the synapse and affect the next cell, passing the message along or sometimes telling it to quiet down. It's this incredibly complex dance of chemicals. Take GABA, that's the main one telling neurons to inhibit, to calm down. Glutamate is the main excitatory one, ramping things up.
So it's not just on, off, it's modulation.
Precisely. It's the balance. Even your morning coffee works by interfering with one of these systems, adenosine, to make you feel more alert. And these connections form intricate pathways, circuits, whole networks. Think of it like roads and highways. You have things like the salience network, that's kind of your internal alarm bell, picking out important stuff from the noise.
Like hearing your name across a crowded room?
Exactly that. And then there's the default mode network. That's what's active when your mind wanders, when you're daydreaming, planning, reminiscing, when your brain's sort of talking to itself.
Okay, so all this activity, billions of cells firing.
Yeah.
It must need a serious support system. Fuel, waste removal.
Absolutely. It's got its own dedicated plumbing and delivery services. Let's talk CSF again, cerebrospinal fluid.
Right, the cushion fluid.
Yes, but it does more. This clear fluid circulates all around the brain, in the space just under the skull membranes, and also inside cavities called ventricles. It's made continuously in the ventricles in structures called the choroid plexus. You've got about 150 milliliters at any time, and it gets completely replaced every maybe 5 or 6 hours.
Wow, constant turnover.
Yeah, it's crucial for cushioning, but also delivering nutrients and, importantly, clearing out waste products.
And that waste clearing brings us to something called the glymphatic system. I heard that's relatively new, understanding that.
It is, yeah. It's been described as the brain's own lymphatic system, its waste disposal network. It actively flushes out interstitial fluid and metabolic junk, including proteins that could become toxic if they build up.
Okay, so why is that so important? And you mentioned timing.
Right. The really cool insight is that this glymphatic system works much, much better during deep sleep.
So that's why sleep is so critical.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just rest, it's cleaning house.
Exactly. It's brain maintenance time, like running the dishwasher overnight, clearing out the gunk that builds up while we're awake.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And the fuel side, you said, uses a ton of energy.
A ton. It's a real energy hog. Remember, only 2% of body weight.
Yep.
But it gets 15% of the blood pumped by the heart, uses 20% of the body's total oxygen, and 25% of the body's glucose.
25% of sugar, just for the brain.
Just for the brain. It needs a constant, rich supply. It gets this blood mainly from 2 pairs of arteries, the internal carotids and the vertebrals. They join up at the base of the brain in a loop called the circle of Willis.
Like a safety backup system.
Kind of, yeah. Helps ensure continuous blood flow even if one route is slightly compromised.
And you mentioned the blood-brain barrier protecting it. How does that work with needing so much fuel?
Great question. The blood-brain barrier, or BBB, is formed by cells in the brain's capillaries that are packed incredibly tightly together. This stops potentially harmful things in the blood toxins, pathogens, from getting into the brain tissue, but it's selectively permeable. Essential stuff like oxygen, carbon dioxide, water gets through easily. Glucose needs special transporters.
What about things like alcohol or anesthetics? They affect the brain pretty quickly.
Right, because they're often fat-soluble. Fat-soluble molecules can slip through the barrier more easily. And it's worth noting, the barrier isn't everywhere. There are a few small areas, like around the pineal gland or hypothalamus, where it's leaky. These areas need to directly sense the composition of the blood to regulate body functions.
Fascinating. Okay, so structure, cells, support systems. Check. Now let's get into the really cool stuff. What the brain does. All the things it lets us do every single day, like moving around, motor control. You mentioned the frontal lobe being the CEO.
Yeah, the frontal lobe is key for planning and initiating voluntary movements. Within it, there's the primary motor cortex. It has a map of the body laid out across it.
The hunculus thing, with the big hands and lips.
Exactly. The motor homunculus. It shows how much brain area is devoted to controlling different parts. Lots for the hands and face for fine control, less for the torso.
But it's not just the frontal lobe, right?
Yeah.
For really smooth, coordinated stuff.
No, definitely not. For that fine-tuning, precision coordination, think playing guitar or typing quickly, the cerebellum and the basal ganglia are absolutely critical. They refine the commands from the motor cortex.
Okay, then there's just experiencing the world, sensory processing.
Right. Your brain is constantly taking in information from all your senses. Touch, pain, temperature, vision, hearing, smell, taste. It has to interpret all that data.
Building our reality, basically.
Pretty much. Take vision. Signals from your eyes travel back to the occipital lobe, the visual cortex. And what's neat is how it's wired. Stuff you see in your left visual field actually goes to the right side of your brain for processing, and vice versa. They cross over at a point called the optic chiasm.
Huh. Okay. And what about the stuff we don't consciously control? Keeping the body running.
Autonomic functions. That's largely the brainstem and hypothalamus at work. The medulla in the brainstem helps control basics like heart rate and breathing rhythm, mostly automatic.
Thank goodness.
Right. And the hypothalamus is a master regulator. It deals with hormone release via the pituitary gland, controls your body clock. The circadian rhythm manages hunger, thirst, body temperature.
So much crucial background processing. And you mentioned the circadian rhythm links back to sleep in that glymphatic cleaning system.
Exactly. The hypothalamus helps regulate sleep cycles, which enables that vital cleanup. It's all interconnected.
Okay, what about language? That feels uniquely human. I remember learning about Broca's and Wernicke's areas.
Yeah, the classic language areas, Broca's for producing speech, Wernicke's for understanding it. And they are important. But our understanding now is much more nuanced. It's not just those two spots. Language involves a much wider network of brain regions working together.
More distributed.
Very much so, which
Mm-mm.
also ties into this idea of lateralization, the two hemispheres specializing. Generally speaking, for most right-handed people, the left hemisphere is dominant for language processing. It also controls the right side of the body.
And the right brain.
The right hemisphere tends to be more involved in things like visual spatial skills, recognizing faces, interpreting emotional tone in speech, and it controls the left side of the body.
And didn't we learn a lot about this from split brain patients?
Huge amounts, yes. These are people who had the corpus callosum, the main fiber bundle connecting the two hemispheres surgically cut, usually to control severe epilepsy.
So the two halves couldn't talk to each other directly.
Pretty much. And in experiments, you could present information just to one hemisphere. For example, show a picture to their left visual field that goes only to the right brain. They wouldn't be able to say what they saw because the language centers are usually in the left brain.
But they knew what it was.
Yes. They could often pick out the object with their left hand, which is controlled by the right brain. It showed the right brain understood, even without language.
Okay.
It's like two separate minds in one head, in some ways.
Wild. Okay, and finally, the big ones. Emotion and thinking. Cognition.
Right. Emotions aren't located in one single spot, of course, but specific circuits are heavily involved. The amygdala is famous for its role in fear and threat detection. The orbitofrontal cortex is important for regulating emotions and decision-making based on potential rewards or punishments.
And cognition. Thinking, planning, problem solving.
That's largely the domain of what we call executive functions. Things like focusing your attention, holding information in mind that's working memory, being flexible in your thinking, controlling impulses, planning ahead.
The stuff the frontal lobe CEO does.
Especially the prefrontal cortex, the very front part of the frontal lobe. It's highly developed in humans and plays a massive role in all these higher-order cognitive abilities that really define our complex behavior.
It's an amazing machine, but it's not foolproof. It's protected, but things can go wrong.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the clinical side. Injuries are a major category traumatic brain injury, TBI, from falls, car accidents, sports impacts.
And repeated impacts can cause long-term damage.
Yes, there's growing concern about conditions like chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE linked to multiple concussions or subconcussive blows, particularly in athletes, shows the cumulative effect of damage.
Then there are diseases.
Devastating ones. Neurodegenerative diseases where brain cells progressively die off, like Parkinson's disease affecting movement, Alzheimer's disease impacting memory and cognition, Huntington's disease. Infections can also attack the brain meningitis, which is inflammation of the protective membranes, or encephalitis, inflammation of the brain tissue itself.
What about tumors?
Brain tumors can develop, yes. But surprisingly, most malignant, or cancerous, tumors found in the brain actually started somewhere else in the body and spread there.
Metastasis.
Right.
Like from lung or breast cancer.
Exactly. Those are common primary sites. And critically, we now understand that many mental health conditions, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, ADHD, OCD, Tourette's, addiction, are fundamentally related to brain function and dysfunction.
You have a biological basis,
Yes.
not a character flaw.
Precisely. They are brain disorders, just like epilepsy or stroke are brain disorders.
Okay, epilepsy, that's like electrical storms in the brain.
In essence, yes. It involves abnormal, excessive electrical activity leading to seizures. And seizures can look very different depending on where in the brain the activity starts.
On stroke, we hear fast.
Yes. Fast, facial drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, time to call emergency services. A stroke happens when blood supply to part of the brain is cut off, usually by a clot or a bleed. Brain cells start dying within minutes without oxygen and glucose. So time is absolutely critical. Getting treatment fast can make a huge difference in recovery. It's truly a medical emergency.
Yeah, and the most extreme outcome, brain death.
Brain death is the irreversible loss of all brain function. Complete coma, no reflexes, can't breathe on their own. It's a legal and medical definition of death, which has profound implications for ending life support and for organ donation.
Such a complex organ with such complex vulnerabilities. Let's shift gears a bit. How have we even thought about the brain throughout history? It hasn't always been seen as the seat of thought, right?
Not at all. It's been a long journey.
One huge question has always been the mind-body problem. How does physical brain stuff create subjective experience? Consciousness.
Right. The philosopher Leibniz had this great analogy, Leibniz's mill. He said if you scaled up the brain to the size of a mill, you could walk inside, but you'd only see cogs and levers turning. You wouldn't see the thought or the feeling.
So where is the mind?
Descartes famously proposed dualism, mind and brain are separate substances. He even guessed the pineal gland was the connection point, the seat of the soul.
But science has mostly moved away from that.
Largely, yes. Empirical evidence keeps pointing back to the brain itself. The classic case is Phineas Gage.
The railway worker.
Yeah, 19th century. An explosion sent an iron rod straight through his frontal lobe. He survived, remarkably, but his personality completely changed. He became impulsive, unreliable.
So damage to the brain changed his mind, his personality.
Exactly. Cases like that strongly suggested mental functions are physically localized in the brain. Most neuroscientists today are materialists. They believe mental phenomena are physical brain activity, though the how is still a huge mystery, the hard problem of consciousness.
And along the way, some myths popped up, like we only use 10% of our brains.
Total myth. Brain scans show we use pretty much all of it, just different parts are more active at different times, depending on the task. It's all working.
Or that you stop making new brain cells after childhood.
Also not true. We now know neurogenesis, creating new neurons, happens in specific areas, like the hippocampus involved in memory, even in adulthood. The brain is more dynamic than we thought.
So looking back, where did our understanding start?
Well, the earliest written mention seems to be in the Edwin Smith Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text from around 1700 BC. It describes head injuries.
Wow, ancient.
But it was the ancient Greeks who really started thinking about its function. Alcmaeon of Croton, around the 5th century BC, was maybe the first to propose the brain, not the heart, was where thought happened.
Ahead of his time, because Aristotle...
Aristotle, yeah, one of the greats, but he thought the heart was the center of intelligence and the brain was just a radiator to cool the blood.
A radiator.
Amazing.
Okay, fast forward a bit.
To the Renaissance, we get more hands-on anatomy. Mondino de Luzzi started doing systematic human dissections around 1316. Then Andreas Vesalius in 1543 published De Humani Corporis Fabrica, stunningly detailed anatomical drawings of the brain. He challenged old ideas like the notion that the fluid-filled ventricles did all the thinking.
He showed the tissue mattered.
Exactly. And then Thomas Willis in the 1660s did detailed work on brain anatomy, coined the term neurology, and described that circle of Willis, the blood vessel loop at the base of the brain we talked about.
Okay, getting closer to modern times.
The 19th century was huge. Discoveries about electricity and nerves, people like Dubois-Reymond and Helmholtz, showed nerve impulses were electrical, not some mystical fluid.
Measurable signals.
Right. And then the game changer for seeing the structure. Camillo Golgi developed a silver staining technique in the 1870s that, for the first time, let scientists see individual neurons, their whole shape.
Finally see the cells themselves.
Yes. Which allowed Santiago Ramon y Cajal to use Golgi's stain and formulate the neuron doctrine, the idea that the brain is made of discrete individual cells, neurons, that communicate across gaps, not a continuous network.
And that's the foundation of modern neuroscience.
Absolutely. Golgi and Cajal actually shared the Nobel Prize in 1906 for this, even though they disagreed on the interpretation. Cajal was right about the neuron doctrine.
And the research just exploded from there.
Pretty much. Leading to things like the Decade of the Brain initiative in the U.S. in the 1990s to boost funding and awareness, and more recently, the huge International Brain Initiative launched in 2013, aiming to develop new tools to map brain circuits. The quest continues, full speed ahead.
What a journey. From thinking it's a radiator to mapping individual circuits, we've covered the brain's structure, its tiny components, its support systems, its incredible functions, what happens when it goes wrong, and how we've thought about it over centuries. It truly is an organ of mind-boggling complexity, and we're still learning so much.
Absolutely. Which leads to a fascinating thought to leave people with. Given everything we're learning, mapping circuits, understanding neurotransmitters, even trying to simulate brain activity with AI, what do you think the next giant leap will be? What's that truly revolutionary aha moment that might crack open our understanding of consciousness or intelligence in a way we can't even imagine right now,
Mhm.
what are we still missing?
That is a big question to ponder. As you go about your day-to-day, maybe just take a second to appreciate it all. That simple act of hearing these words, thinking about them, remembering something later, it's all happening thanks to this incredible, intricate network inside your head.